Hello and welcome. Today I am doing a collaboration video with a friend of mine. Her name's Lisa Christensen. She is an amazing, fabulous watercolorist. I have absolutely no talent with watercolor, uh, but we had this idea. We thought it would be fun to take one image, neither one of us know what the other one's doing with it, make a card and see what happens. And I assume she's using watercolor. I bet she assumes, and she would assume right, that I'm using my Copics, and it'll be a total surprise. I'm excited to see what she comes up with, and hopefully she feels the same. But here's my finished card. I'm going to use Copics and some airbrushing techniques to make this. If you want to hang in there, you can see the whole process. Thank you so much for watching. Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be working with this image from Penny Black. I think it's called Flower Perch. I'll post it in the comments below. If you're interested in purchasing this stamp, the first thing I'm going to do is actually do a little bit of airbrushing. If you are following along and you want to make this card, you do not need an airbrush system. You can do this with your Copics, like just coloring them and fade it out to white. This is just a lot faster. That being said, cutting this mask out was less than fun, but I did it because I really wanted to have like a soft yellow in the background. In the grand scheme of things, this is going to be very subtle, but I wanted to do it, so here we are. And I just cut the mask out of regular copy paper, and I noticed I didn't get all of the leaves, and that's okay because we're going to color the leaves green, and I'm going to airbrush with yellow, and so that yellow isn't going to even show up, and the yellow won't hurt the green Copics because they're both Copics, so it won't matter in the end. So I'm just trying to match up the best I can these little flower masks to the right spot. I should mention, this is actually a collaboration project. I'm doing this with a friend of mine, Lisa Christensen. She's going to do the same stamp, but she's going to use watercolors to color it. And I'm going to use Copic. So I have no idea what she's doing. What color scheme, I have no idea. And she doesn't have any idea what I'm doing. So we thought it'd be kind of cool to see what two crafters came up with using the same stamp, different mediums. All right, to airbrush, I'm going to use Y35 and Y32. Like I said, I want this to be really light. If you're unfamiliar with airbrushing, it actually turns out a shade lighter than what it would look like if you're coloring on paper. The airbrush is also kind of loud, so I'm going to mute this so you don't have to listen to the sound of the airbrush, but you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to pull off the masks. And here's our great reveal. I can save these now for another card. Now notice that there are some white spaces that are like between the bird's legs. Like I could have fussy cut all that out, or between the flowers, and I decided not to do that. I figured that would be a much bigger pain in the butt than what I could do with my markers. For example, here I can come in with Y32 and just kind of color this in, and we can get very similar looks. I can actually soften that a little bit. It will in a second. So I'm just flat coloring in these little spaces here between the flowers that I didn't cut out of my mask. Now it gets a little trickier when you're at the outside here. I'm just kind of doing the spots that are really bad. I don't want to do any more than I need to. It's more noticeable if I were to come in and put a line along that branch. That would be really hard to blend in because I can't get to the lighter color that I airbrushed with. So I'm just going to leave that I'd rather have that little bit of white there than I would a strong yellow line. All right, so I cleaned up my airbrushing mess, and now I got my 0, and I'm gonna go in and just put a light coat over these, and it's gonna help soften them a little bit. I might do this once or twice, but I'm just doing it to help them blend in a little bit more with the yellow that's surrounding them. But I thought this was way easier than trying to cut all those little tiny spaces out. As you can see, that works pretty well. All right. I still have no idea what kind of bird this is. The picture I found didn't even have information about it. I just was like, okay, and went with it. So this is not meant to be a real image. These flowers would not exist like in the spray form, so I wasn't too concerned with being super accurate. I spend a lot of time coloring dark to light, but you are welcome, you can of course do this light to dark as well. And all I did was I started where I thought the shadows would be the darkest, and I'm coming in and flicking in some color. Now I'm going to leave a little band around his eye, so that's why I'm kind of sketching this in. And birds are nice to color because they have feathers. There's lots of texture. You don't need it to be very smooth. So it's nice to kind of leave some of those marks, and that's another reason I'm not worried about coloring this big space without, because if it leaves some blending strokes in there, I'm okay with that. Okay. And I didn't want to draw a line across. I wanted to have some texture in there because their feathers would have texture. And I am going to darken this up a little bit more. The bird I saw had like black band by its eyes. I'm not going to use black. I'm going as dark as C7 at the moment. I might come back and add some more. But I don't want his eye to get lost in this as well. You know, this part here, if it's all black, then you can't really see his eye. So now I'm going to take some of my grays, and that wasn't dark enough, so I'm going up to my C5. And the ends of the bird's tail had some dark colors, and the ends of their wings had some dark gray or almost black in them. So I'm going to start feathering in some of that color. I'm going to jump back to my blues, and I'm going to start adding in more blue. Now, I'm not sure if I want to leave this white highlight in there yet or not. I feel like it might be, I don't know, too much. Well, I'm going to leave it for now. And I'm going to do the belly of this bird, and then I can always come back to my blues. I'm just going to set them up here and I can decide. So for the bellies of the birds, I decided to use the E40 series, E44, and the little butt of the bird is the darkest, so I'm going to put in some of that dark brown. And from there, I'm going to flick up towards the neck of the bird. If someone knows the name of this bird, please feel free to share it. I could have put a tiny bit more effort into it. I kind of was like looking for a picture and I'm like, okay, found it, and there you go. And it didn't have any information about it. All right, so now I'm going to take some C0 and I'm just going to, I didn't want that to be super stark white, but the neck, right under the beak of the bird, there was like a little white tuft, and maybe what I'll do is I'll just put this over these marks here so it's, again, not stark white, because I think that looked weird next to the yellow background. So I am okay with that. All right, so now let's do the beak of the bird. The top of the beak was bluish, and the bottom of the beak was cream or like a white. And we're actually going to come back and do a little more to this bird, but what I want is for this alcohol to dry before we continue on. So I'm not going to do a whole bunch. I am going to go take a C and just do the bottom so it doesn't look so white against that. And there we go. And while I have them out, I decided that the legs are going to be a dark gray. And I'm not going to do any shading inside the leg. Just gonna fill this in. I didn't think there was any real need. All right, so he has his legs, and I'm gonna start working on the branches and the flowers. I'm gonna do the branches first. I'm gonna start in with E74, and where the branches are very close to the bird, I'm going to make them darker. They are so thin. And we're going to have so much shading on this card. This is my theory on this anyway, is that we could go through and try to blend E71 and E74 on these branches. But you know what? I don't think people, one, will notice. And two, you know, compared to everything else, people, your eyes are going to be drawn to so many things here that we don't need to stress ourselves out with trying to you know, do something of that nature. And actually, I didn't even use E71. So you could have, I didn't. I just think we went ahead and took care of that. All right, next off, we're going to do the one set of flowers. To me, there are three kinds of flowers here. There, again, I'm making this up. Don't know if this is real or not. But I'm going to make my first set pink, and here's the set of pinks that I am going to be using. And I am actually going to start with R85. And from the center of the flower, I'm going to start flicking out on my petals, R85. And depending on how fast you color is how many petals you can do it at one time. If you color very slowly, or you're new and you're just getting used to your copics, I recommend doing one petal at a time. And as you get better and more confident, you can start adding, you know, 2 petals, 3 petals, until you start to get the feeling of your markers and how you handle them. And I'm just starting from my dark and I'm working towards my light. And I'm pushing the color from the center of the flower towards the tip of each petal. And I'm gonna also put some color here in the center. I'm going to color the center of those flowers, but we'll do that later. And then my lightest color is RV10, which is not in the same color family, but I really like how these colors look together. This is one of my favorite blends. Now I'm trying to decide, to me this is drawn by as a leaf, but I think it's a petal. I don't know, it just seems like we're missing a petal off this flower. So I'm going to color it as a petal. I'm going to be curious to see how Lisa interpreted that. Is that a petal or a leaf? Well, it's a petal now. Okay, so there's my base coat. Now I mean, I think this looks nice, you know, but I think it could look better. So what I tend to do is then I save my darkest color, which in this case is going to be R56, and this is what really gives me the contrast. And I like to go back and add this in, and I do this at the end mostly because, one, I don't want it to be totally blended out, and two, I really like to have an idea of how much to put on, and sometimes I don't always know in the beginning how much dark I should put on. So if I don't know, I definitely start with my lighter tones. And if I'm unsure about this, for example, just a little bit, I go through and push this color because I don't like the harsh lines that it leaves when you do that. But I'm very light-handed. Just working my way through. Okay, and then lastly, RV10, and that just kind of smooths out the I'm going to just continue on doing the same thing to these other two flowers. So that's it for the 3 pink flowers. I'm going to go love on a 3-year-old for a minute. I'll let this dry and I'll come back and do some more. Alright, to do the greens, this is the set of greens I picked out. I'm going to start with YG67. And in the, I don't know, I'll start with this leaf here. And I started with my darkest, and I'm working towards my lightest. and my absolute lightest is G20. And I picked G20 because it has kind of a yellow, well, yellow greens have yellow in them anyway, but G20 also has, I think, at least in my opinion, a very yellow tint. And I think it would look really good as the highlight. Now I'm coming in for my darkest part with a little bit of G85 just to darken in like where the vein is on the leaf and around the base. So there's YG67. Using my lighter colors to push that out. Extend that shadow down the middle. Now again, because some of these leaves have yellow from that airbrushing, it's fine. I don't think you even notice when they're colored that was there. And because it's copic and copics do great together, it doesn't matter. It's not like the green markers picking up any of the yellow or I'm going to ruin it at all. So these smaller ones, it might have been a flower. Well, it's a leaf now. I might not use all 5 colors. We'll see how this goes. I still want to have contrast in them. So I'm doing my best to try to leave some room. But again, you know, the star of the show is the bird and these flowers. If the leaves aren't perfect, it's one of those things I just don't think people will notice. But that being said, I like to do my best work, so I'm always going to include them when I can. I'm not going to worry about the G85. So for the little leaves, I'm only using 4 instead of 5 colors. These are the 4. All right, continuing on, I'm going to do this little branch up here. Okay, awesome. So I have this group of leaves here left, but what I noticed was, I'm not sure, I guess the leaf curls under the flower, but I think I'm going to alter this a little bit. I'm going to, again, curious to see how Lisa handles this. But I think I'm going to kind of draw in a little line here and end my leaf, leaving a little bit more of a gap. To me, it's amazing how the greenery really pulls this image together. It just, for me, this is what made it come alive. I really like how the greens are like the glue in this image, I think. All right, so I have a few lines I want to soften here, so I'm just using my lightest green and softening them out. But again, this is a personal preference. You could have left them. And I think I have all the greens, so I'm going to set those aside. But what I did notice is that I still have a couple little yellow pieces to color in on the background. I think you got them all. All right, now let's tackle these 3 flowers. I'm actually going to use yellow, but I'm going to use brown with yellow so it looks different than the background. I don't want it to look the same. So these are the colors I pulled out. I might modify this as we go, but let's just see here. So starting from the inside, I'm going to flick, and I want them to be darker. I want them to pop out from the background. Especially these, because they're right up against the yellow, or parts of them are right up against the yellow. So there's my dark. And now I'm going to jump to Y32. And then my lightest is going to be YR31, excuse me. And then I'm going to come in with, this is E13. And I love the way E13 looks with yellow. So I'm lightly on the edges of the petal adding some, just like we did with like the G85. And now I can come back in and blend that out a little bit so it doesn't look so brown. But now we have a nice little flower. And we're going to come back and do the centers of all these flowers. I like to let them dry so that the centers don't bleed into, and you know, the other petals. And I know it doesn't prevent bleeding completely, but it does help. So I'm continuing with these. And this group of flowers, I'm, you know, paying attention, but not being as careful as I was with the pink flowers. I'm just putting in the center of each petal, I kind of put the base of the yellow, and then I'm coming out and pushing that out. And then with my lightest, which is the Y32, and the yellows are hard because there's not, especially in the grayer yellows, not very many choices, but, and you know, yellow blends together really well. So right now I kind of think it looks like ugh, but when I go through and I'm going to add in this Y13, I think it's going to really help the little piece of the background I missed. I keep finding little, and anything in the very back is going to be darker. Okay. Then again, just going out and softening. And I'm not even really flicking. I'm almost dabbing over the E13 because it blends so easily. I'm just kind of letting the alcohol do the work instead of me pushing it with a flick stroke. Just kind of dabbing. And there you go. So when it, I don't know, let me know what you think. Does that stand out from the background? I think once we put the centers in there, I think it'll be even more dramatic. And lastly, I'm going to do these 3 the same way. So starting with my darker. So there you go. So those were really fast and simple to do. And so I'm going to set my yellows aside. I'm going to grab my blender pen, my 0, and I have a little bit of color here in this petal, and I'm going to just push it out. It's from the airbrushing. We must have not had the mask down perfectly, because I'm going to try to make this flower white, and I don't want it to have a yellow tint at all. So I'm going to leave that as it is. And I think our bird's dry, especially because I had to take a little break there. So I'm going to pull out some of the colors I use. I'm going to start here. And because I think he looks a little flat, I'm going to start adding some, like, I don't know. I think this is called pointillism. And it just kind of adds some texture and life to the bird. So again, I'm coming back in here with my, I'm not being super careful because again, nature isn't careful. And the bigger the, or I'm sorry, the lighter the color, the bigger the dots. The darker the color, the smaller the dots. In this case, it's not always true how you focus it, but for this bird, I feel like that makes a big difference in how he looks. And I might come in here a little bit with the blues and very lightly, I'm just darkening up some spots. I want there to be more contrast. If you can tell, I don't really have a plan. I'm just guessing. But I think that helps deepen. And then I think I'm going to go in with C5 here. I just feel like I need some to darken up some shadows. And it's kind of tough because this bird's, the tips of the bird's wings were darker in the photo. And trying to stay true, but also create some shadow and dimension too. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to leave that. Put my grays away. I'm going to pull my pinks back out. And I'm going to work on these flowers up here. I was originally thinking about doing them purple, and you could, but I didn't. I was thinking I already have a lot of colors going on here. I don't want to add more. I think I have enough colors going on that I don't want to distract your eyes. You're going to have too many things to look at. So I think I'm going to repeat and pull some colors from the other area to complete these flowers up here. But instead of like flicking, I'm going to do that same technique of just dots. I think I'm going to do, just to give these some texture, and I'm imagining in my head that the center of the flower is darker than the tip. So I'm trying, this is my dark shade. So I'm going to still use all my shades, but I'm putting dots in towards the center of the flower for the most part. And then as I go through my lighter colors, I'm going to start pulling the dots out towards the tip, or the edges, I should say, of the flowers. And the lighter the color, the larger the dot, smaller the color, the darker the dot, smaller the dot, the darker the color. I hope you can speak crisp because sometimes my words and I don't get along. Okay. And this is the RV10. I'm kind of just filling in. And if I have some white in there, I'm okay with that. This isn't a big deal to me because maybe there's like little white edges to the petals or whatever. So I again don't want them to be the focal point, but there you go. Hey, miss a color. I'm gonna put some in here. And then lastly, I'm going to use my R56 and I'm going to do smaller dots and I concentrate them towards the middle of the flower. I'm just trying to give them more shape. Cool. Awesome. So I'm going to put my pinks away. And now I'm going to work on the centers of these 3 pink flowers. I'm going to start with C5 and, well, maybe C3. Start with C3. And I'm going to cover up the center of the flower because I definitely don't want any white to show. This is going to be the deepest, darkest. And this was kind of inspired by poppies. I tend to grab yellows for the center of my flowers a lot, but I decided that I wanted a more muted look. So I colored the center with C3 and then I'm going to go in with C5 and C7 and do some of these dots as well to break up that so it looks like there's texture in there. And there we go. And then while we're at it, I'm going to take E15 and inside and flowers, we're going to add some, and maybe in the very deepest, darkest parts here, I might add a little, maybe those are little flowers tucked in the back. Okay, I'm happy with how that looks. All right, I know I still need to do this flower, but this is going to take some time to dry, so while I'm working on the flower, this can be drying. I'm taking a white gel pen, and when you look at the stamp, there is a ring of white around this bird's eye. And it kind of gets lost when you color, and because we colored around the bird's eye this grayish black color, I wanted to add that back in so that it wasn't getting lost. And inside the center of it, I'm going to take a black glaze pen and dab, trying to make it so that the eye is really, really dark. So while that's drying, we can color this flower. And I'm going to go for white, but I'm going to make it a dull gray white because I don't want that to be like, bam, there's a rose or like whatever that is right there. So I'm kind of trying to soften it. I'm using C3 in the deepest, darkest parts of this flower. And in the center, I'm just going to dab a little C3. And then I'm going to use C1. And I don't want to go all the way to the ends. I'm just pushing that and kind of softening that line. And then I'm going to take my 0. Actually, I'm going to take C0, so it's still got some gray in it. And softening that a little bit, although it's pretty soft. And there you go. I'm going to add some final little touches to this. I know the camera isn't going to pick these up very well, but I'm still going to do it. And this is a glitter or a stardust pen. And I'm just going to put little dots of sparkle in the centers of these flowers. And I'm just going to put a couple in these flowers. And these are really subtle. I even wonder sometimes, but I really like, it just adds a hint of interest to them. And while we're at it, these you can kind of see like where the stamen are. So I'm going to add some to the stamen. And I think that is it for our... I don't want it. Okay, baby, I'll come help you in a second. Anyway, I think that's it for our coloring portion of this card. I'm going to let it dry and then we'll finish it up all the way. All right, so what I did was I found a stitched rectangle die. I think this one's by Lawn Fawn. It might be my favorite things, but pretty much every company has one nowadays. And I ran that through my die cutting machine. And it cut and left a stitched border all the way around the die. And then I found some paper in my stash. This is by, the paper's by Stampin' Up. It's an old color. I think it's been long discontinued, but it matched my bird well. So that was what I was looking for, something that matched the colors of my bird. And I'm going to glue this down. And I'm just going to center that down. And as I had mentioned before, I really need a sympathy card. So I'm going to stamp with sympathy on this. And when I was going through my images, trying to find words, and everything was really, really big. And we spent all this time making this card. I didn't want to like put a banner strip across the flowers at the bottom or at the top. So I wanted to find something really small. And I found this one. I also think it's by Stampin' Up, out of a set called Teeny Weeny Wishes. And I think, and because I'm using, I usually like to stamp with VersaFine, but I have Memento and it's right here, and I have my Misty. I can stamp it a few times. It's not a big deal. But it's a really, really small sentiment, but it fit in that little nook perfectly. So that was why I went with it. And there we go. I think I'm going to leave the card as is, but there we go. I think that's my finished card. If you've hung in there with me this long, I really want to appreciate you spending your time with me. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. If you haven't yet, please hop over to see what Lisa did with her image with watercolor. I'm dying to see. I have no idea, so it's kind of a cool surprise because who knows what she did. She doesn't know what I did. Please leave me a comment. That means a lot to me. It encourages me to keep making videos, which I really like doing. It's just hard with time and a little one to do so. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.